Welcome to the Unlock Podcast, an innovative approach towards human development. My name is Amanda, and today I am joined by Alison Manuel Morgan, who's a leadership coach and an Unlock associate. Alison's coaching approach takes you on a transformative journey towards leadership characterized by heightened awareness and compassion. With an extensive background in executive coaching, commerce, coaching psychology, and counseling psychology, Alison brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to her practice. Her impressive qualifications are complemented by her published academic work, further demonstrating her commitment to continuous learning and development. What sets Alison apart is her ability to create sessions that seamlessly blend practical wisdom with a perfect balance of depth and lightness. She understands the importance of addressing profound insights while maintaining an atmosphere of ease and positivity. Join us as we explore the depths of leadership with Alison Manuel Morgan and discover how her unique coaching style can empower you to become the conscious and compassionate leader you aspire to be. So welcome, Alison, officially to the Unlock Podcast.
Hey, thank you, Amanda. I hope I can live up to the expectation of all of that.
You're the expert here, right? I'm just enabling the conversation. And today we will be addressing how to intertwine coaching and spirituality. Coaching is a collaborative and transformative process that aims to support individuals in achieving their personal and professional goals. It involves a structured relationship between a coach and a client, where the coach facilitates the client's self-discovery, learning, and growth. Through powerful questioning, active listening, and goal setting, coaching helps individuals unlock their potential, overcome obstacles, and make positive changes in their lives. While spirituality refers to an individual's inner journey of seeking meaning, purpose, and connection to something greater than themselves. It is often associated with an exploration of one's values, beliefs, and the transcendent aspects of life. Spirituality can encompass a range of practices, including meditation, prayer, contemplation, mindfulness, and reflection. It involves nurturing a deep sense of self-awareness, exploring personal values and beliefs, and cultivating a connection to the interconnectedness of all beings. When intertwining these two, the focus is on integrating spiritual principles, values, and practices into the coaching process. This approach acknowledges and honors the spiritual dimension of individuals, allowing them to tap into their inner wisdom, align with their authentic selves, and make choices in alignment with their spiritual beliefs and aspirations. By combining coaching and spirituality, individuals can experience holistic growth, increased self-awareness, and a greater sense of purpose and fulfillment in their lives. So without further ado, let's dive into our first question for you, Alison, which would be, how would you define the intersection between coaching and spirituality, and why do you believe it is important in personal and professional development?
The first thing I want to say, Amanda, is that was a very, very concise and very good summary that you brought to bringing into the definition of spirituality. And I just wanted to say thank you for that, because you've made my work a lot easier. Because one of the things that you want to be able to understand when you try to take a spiritual approach to coaching is that, the definition for coaching is itself quite a nebulous concept. And I think, in academia, there's just so many different definitions of it. And of course, we have our own understanding from our kind of layman human experience. So to begin to answer your first question, I think it's important to say what spirituality is and what it is not. And you were right to say that spirituality is really the recognition that something greater than the self exists. So although there are overlaps with religion, which is like the more collectively institutionalized response to the sacred, spirituality, no, let me go back to religion. I think in religion, there are all these rules and rituals that you must observe, whereas spirituality is much more personal, and it's a much more subjective approach to the sacred. It's very free of the rules and regulations and responsibilities associated with religion. Now, where it intersects with coaching is the point at which, let's say, usually when you're coaching a person, and you're coaching for a desired behavior change, you will look at that person's relationship with the outer world. You will look at that person's inner world beliefs, mindsets, motivations, patterns of thinking, all of that. But where or when you begin to include the spiritual dimension is the point in which you bring into coaching that person's relationship with, for me, what is life itself. So how do they relate with the greater question of life, the questions of who am I? Why am I here? What is the nature of ultimate reality? And essentially, whichever way you answer that question, what it comes down to in a more practical expression is to begin to touch on the spaces of where our interconnectedness, where our perceptual boundaries of self and others lie, and where those perceptual boundaries of self and others start to fade. So I hope that makes sense to you. So we're looking at that connection between the kind of larger intersectedness of all of us when we bring that into coaching in terms of how we're going to formulate or strive to create outer behavior change. What makes it important to personal and professional development is that it allows for an opportunity for growth that goes far beyond the behavior change in the specified system. So with leadership coaching, for example, you're looking at change within an organization maybe, or say in life coaching, a client might want to see change implemented in a couple dynamic or a family system. But when you include the element of the sense making within that ontological dimension of spirituality, of being itself, capital B being in your coaching process, then where that definition of spirituality resides, you're now able to take your client on a journey where they're not just improving behavior change within the narrow parameter of a daily problem, but they're using that challenge to leverage your whole life perspective. You're engaging all of your client's sense-making capacities within the phenomenological or felt experience with, I think what the word people like to use is the great web of life itself. So you're able to then find a bit more resolution, a bit more harmony, a bit more integration with you as you are in a relationship with yourself, then with your relationships, then with your system, then with life itself. And I hope that's starting to make sense. For some people, it can be a relationship, with the divine or the cosmos, though that's not necessarily where spirituality needs to take you, but it can take you there. So when you get it right, it's a deeper kind of growth, a more fulfilling kind of growth. And in some cases, it can set you up with a very well-defined platform for change that you can use in the future as well.
Thank you so much for that very well explained interconnection, because I did the intertwining generic answer, correct? But you are talking how would these actually benefit you as a coachee, let's say. So this brings me to the next question, which is, in your experience, how can spirituality enhance coaching techniques and approaches? And what benefits does it bring to the coaching process?
Okay. Let's see. I think we've kind of sort of answered the second part a little bit of this question already in a way, but let me try to bring a bit more specificity to my answers. Perhaps from a more science-based perspective, we can look at the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn when he adapted Eastern meditation principles and practice into what he called mindfulness, or I think it was MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So what he did there was to clinicalize a spiritual technique. And he took that technique to assist in the process of awakening and ultimately self-liberation in how it was done in the Eastern form. But in the way that he clinicalized it, he took it into the more mainstream domain of psychology. So all of those concepts, all of those lofty concepts of the awakening and liberation and transcendence, he brought back those techniques and translated them into the basics of what that process can do for you, which is just a very high level of self-awareness. So almost injecting a dose of steroids to make possible in the brain the awareness of not just the self in relationship to itself, but the self in relationship to all material manifestations of form. So that's a bit abstract, isn't it? So if you think about the subject-object dichotomy, where you begin to train to have this kind of separate identity, I think that's when you can see how coaching can use spirituality in that way. What the Eastern concept would be speaking about is that to be free of egoic limitations of the smaller self. And usually what we know is that part of the problems that we come into a coaching context, which is that we've become kind of stuck in a kind of myopic self-interest of protection. And in here, when we talk about protection, you can bring in the neuroscience of that as well. But how spirituality can enhance a coaching technique, say using that example, is to bring another powerful lens, basically, when you analyze a problem, how you solution, how you anchor in change from the dimension of the perspective of something larger than the smaller self itself. Okay. Now, positive psychology has done a great deal of research on the benefits of actively including that dimension of spirituality to well-being. So if you go online, you'll find many hundreds, if not thousands, of articles now that document with kind of scientific rigor the benefits of bringing spirituality into coaching. And I think one of the stronger researchers are pointing to increases in gratitude, increases in meaning in life, positive well-being, increases in self-actualization. And the self-actualization piece, it's what's so valuable to the workforce, to leadership, because that's the maximizing of an individual's innate potential. Now, this concept of spirituality also links very strongly to servant leadership, the idea of serving something greater than the self, seeing yourself where you serve people around you. You serve the mission that you are to fulfill. You prioritize those needs over the needs of the smaller self. And this can be very liberating when you take that new perspective. You're kind of free from all these contractions that you feel when you're just kind of thinking about the you. You can take that viewpoint and bring that back into yourself from a much larger perspective of how am I serving the greater system itself. What else would I like to say about this? It's not, when I say this, it's not a statement or it's not a license to avoid the importance of self-care. It's not like you're negating the importance of the self, but what you're doing is you're integrating this inextricable interconnectedness of the me to the we, to the perspective that can include all sentient life as far as your sense making would like to go to. And so in that way, you're entering a playing field of not just human behavior, but human consciousness as well. So I think, okay, maybe in a nutshell, translated into a practical language, it means we can coach for the well-being of the person, the system, the planet, all at once, and something that fits perfectly with the kind of clients we love to have and the kind of work we love to do at Unlock.
Yeah, so great that you just mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you, can you share like an example of a specific coaching practice or tool that incorporates spiritual principles? Like yeah, if you could share like maybe like a case study, like something that has positively impacted the transformation of an individual or an organization. You can talk about connected to Unlock or not.
Yeah. I mean, bearing in mind confidentiality. Let me take a more sort of generic perspective to that first, because I think the thing is, coaching at its highest level is coaching with spiritual principle in mind. Like, so for example, if you're talking about specific coaching practices or tools, well, transformational coaching is an example, because that looks at the level of belief, values, identity, and purpose. And it seeks to have that change translated into a kind of embodied and energetic shift, which is very much in line with how, spiritual principle is about an energetic shift ultimately. Because energetic shifts is what we are seeking when you're talking about that states of awakening in spirituality, from the lower self-interested forms of energetic expression, the me, the I, the smaller I, the energetic sort of embodiment of how we are constantly in defense of the self, in defense of our tribe, in defense of the what we feel is closest to us in the smaller way. Am I making sense here, Amanda?
Yeah, I am totally following. I think, well, in easier or I think in easier words to explain this, it's essentially what really connects to you, right? Like regarding your values and your beliefs, and bringing them to your practice, to your coaching practice in this. So let's put like a hypothetical case study here. So let's say that we separate them, right? So if a coachee is coming to a coach and they don't have that sense where they can show up and still embody their beliefs and their values and all these things, that would seem more like a role rather than an actual transformation. So we're looking more towards an embodiment of these two intertwining rather than them acting separate, because that way we can actually achieve higher and better, well, transformations.
Yeah,
Is that
yes,
aligned?
yeah, definitely you're on track there. And in terms of coaching tools, there's so many, right? There's transformational coaching, there's Zen coaching. I don't know if you've heard of psychosynthesis coaching. There's transpersonal coaching. So with psychosynthesis, you're working to reorient a person's selfhood, or of the whole self, not just the human experience, but also that of how they define, or how you might define for yourself, the soul or the spirit. And if you use kind of more the intelligences, the Howard Gardner understanding of intelligences, it's the SQ. So there's a spiritual quotient, and they do a lot of work in terms of assessments and tools where you can actually analyze the improvements of that. I think there's one called the DSES, where you measure the spiritual quotient, and the spiritual quotient is usually a combination of the IQ and the EQ. So they do measure for exactly where that how you can see your spirituality grow and how it can help you in terms of the goals that you set for yourself. So in terms of tools, of course, there's the key ones in spirituality are meditation, mindfulness, and working to become more present-minded. There's visualization techniques. There are, it's very common when you take a spiritual approach that you can maybe form like a sacred avatar, a god or a goddess, for example, and then you can use a technique called the 3-to-1 technique. So you experience the inner qualities of that deity from a third person perspective, which is about knowledge of that deity, then a second person perspective where you begin to have a relationship with that deity, and then the first person perspective where you start to kind of fully inculcate in yourself that energetic expression of the values that you want to have, right? So those are some of the tools that you can bring in terms of a specific example. Perhaps let's do that later, because I think I'd love to share with you. Maybe I just got out of a coaching session about an hour ago, so forgive me if I'm a little flustered. But this was a last coaching session, and this coachee gave me a lot of feedback in terms of what that transformational shift was. So let's do that at the end of this. But those are some of the things that you can do when you're talking about tools and how you incorporate those tools into practices. Positive psychology has one called Cultivating Sacred Moments, and that's very well tested. And I can explain how that works for you. But, for us to kind of come into a nutshell of what we're talking about, many, many, many tools that you can use, which is largely about just figuring out what it is you identify with as greater than yourself, looking at those values and then bringing that back into the self.
Yeah. So exactly what you just mentioned, how would you navigate diverse spiritual beliefs, right? Like these backgrounds of clients while maintaining an inclusive and respectful coaching environment?
I suppose you pay attention to where it overlaps and where it doesn't overlap, right? So on the one level, each person has a very individual and unique brand of spirituality based on their culture, based on their personal choices, etc. And on another level, we all share the same wiring with what we perceive to be the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? So spiritual emotions are, in a sense, human emotions of what we all subscribe to. And the aim when you bring in a spiritual perspective to coaching is to come back to those spiritual emotions. And those emotions in academia, of course, in academia, of course, academia is always just the map. It's not the territory. But academias can come to define spiritual emotions as love, hope, joy, forgiveness, compassion, and I think it's trust and gratitude. Oh, and awe. Awe is the other one. So these are the emotions that we're aiming to sort of bring forth in the coaching environment, and aiming for coaches to have a much stronger relationship with. If we jump in, I think we'll take quite a long discussion, but it was Jung who said that our propensity for religious or spiritual thinking, this is an inherent human quality. So this is something that is in all of us, whether we like it or not, which explains a lot when you look at the history of our sense making and how many gods or goddesses or religions that we've come up with as human beings, right? So this part of our sense making connects us to the source of the creative potential that lies within us. So from a coach's perspective, there really is nothing to navigate in terms of bringing a spiritual point of view into coaching, because on some fundamental level, we're always coaching for spiritual values, whether we call it that or not. And then on another point, in coaching, it's kind of so easy because the coachee is always leading the coaching. You're not there to say, I'm going to take you on a spiritual journey. The coachee decides that. So as a coach, you're just merely following, and you're looking at where all those intersectionalities overlap with spiritual principle, and you're just leveraging that. It's quite a gentle and easy process, and there's nothing for you to come in with any great intention about, etc., etc. You might have your own intention for a coaching outcome that is obviously good and correct, but you don't go in there with trying to think about like, okay, this person has this coaching belief, how do I do that? You're just following all the time, and you're letting them lead, and then the process itself takes its own kind of life form, I suppose.
Yeah, so connected to something that you actually said before, well, you have been mentioning a lot self, right? So let's talk a little bit about what role does self-awareness play in the practice of coaching, and how can spirituality contribute to the development of self-awareness of the clients?
So in coaching, self-awareness is everything. It's just, it lies at the core of what we do. No matter what modalities and systems of coaching you might use, that self-awareness piece goes to the heart of change. You cannot get change. We can't work with what we don't know. So until we define what it is about the self that is seeking to transform, only then can we begin to put in the tricks and the tools that might assist in the process of change as we co-create them. How can spirituality contribute to the development of coaching? Well, again, taking one academic perspective, right? And I can qualify here that I use the word academic again, mostly as a kind of pointer to knowing that in itself is not the essence of spirituality. It just helps us to bring some form in the way we speak about it. So we start at the bottom, going back to the question, who am I? Why am I here? What is the true nature of reality? In coaching, we can take a client's desired future state. Okay, so say that client comes to us and wants to be better at something like task delegation. Now, you can work with that on a number of levels. You can work with that at the level of the systems. You can co-creatively come up with ideas like, okay, better alignment of tasks to the ultimate organizational vision. You can have a lot of tips and tricks for more regular check-ins, say. You can, learn how to prioritize the high-ticket items and have a way of kind of, identifying those. So that's one point of view, right? Working at the outer world level. Then you can work with relationships, how I speak to others, what values I might bring to that conversation, what questions I might shed light on in terms of helping them articulate their problems to the task. So that's the relationship part, right? And then we come to the third part, which is the internal I, or the analysis of the self, which is the self-leadership part. And on that part, you can go to whatever level of depth that you want, that your client is willing to go to. Now here, maybe they value equality, maybe they value empowerment, maybe they value empathy, but you can expand that lens ever outward. So how does that self-leadership style fit into their purpose, their mission, their calling in life? Okay, then you extend that lens outwards again. How does that fit into their relationship to life itself? Okay, the legacies that they might want to leave, the alignments with their faith, what might lie beyond the dimension of the physical form. And at each stage, we're moving towards something that's more than just being human in a sensory experience, but considering what might be, your personal sacred responsibility towards the greater understanding of life itself as it has meaning for you.
My next question was going to be, how can we ensure, these ethical boundaries when we are incorporating spiritual elements in our coaching practice, because you're speaking about, you know, this self-awareness, or this sense of self that's higher, or bigger than any of us, right? But how can we be respectful of these boundaries? Like how can we enforce that the ethical boundaries are maintained during a coaching practice?
Yeah, no, that is always an important question. You know, we have to be very mindful, of course, in our profession, as ethics is profoundly important in what we do. And as working professionals, we have an enormous responsibility to be aware of our code of conduct. But in coaching, again, for me, it's especially easy if we stick to that principle of being client-led. So I would never myself go into coaching with the personal intention of bringing a spiritual agenda into coaching. But, you know, but simply my job is to go where the client leads me. And if that lends itself to coaching with the spiritual lens, so be it. And if it doesn't, so be that too. Some clients don't want to go anywhere near it. They just want to talk about, you know, how do I transform this outer reality? What things do I need to just do? Well, in that case, we go with the doing. We don't touch the being. We don't touch any of those ontological dimensions, because it's not going to work anyway. So if you follow that principle, clients will always show you what matters most to them. Like quite literally within the first few minutes of coaching, you will get a very strong sense of what the person wants from you, and your job is simply to let them lead. So, you know, if there is the potential as a coach for me, and I see someone, you know, talking about a particular problem where I think, okay, and this person says Hindu, and maybe like, you know, a goddess intervention, talk about goddess interventions, because Hinduism is brilliant for having so many avatars, particularly from a feminist perspective, you know. And I think, okay, that might work. I would then, you know, ask the question of ethics would then come to a place of informed consent. You know, would you like to try this? Would this be something you're interested to? You just never take on an agenda without permission, really. It's always based on the client themselves holding their authority over their self-agency in the process.
Yeah, I like how you say that you allow the clients to choose what is their goal, if they're focused on the being or whatnot, and then you can completely ignore it to actually be very goal oriented, in the sense that you're keeping them into account of the results that they expect, and well, you can enable it. So how do you assess the readiness and the openness to engage in spiritual aspects in the coaching journey? Like how can you adapt and approach accordingly?
So how do you assess the readiness of someone to go in? Again, I don't do that. It's never on the agenda. You know, I am simply myself, a student of the mystical and the metaphysical, and I have a very fortunate background of being exposed to many ancient wisdom traditions. So, you know, when you're a Malaysian, you are all of it all at once. So, you know, for me, I'm born with two backgrounds, with Catholicism and Buddhism, but I live in a country where Taoism, where you know, Hinduism and Islam is really predominant in everyday life. So you grow up with just that sensor, with that sensor on. It's very acutely on in your mind when someone's speaking what their sort of personal beliefs and faith systems are. And if the client alludes to that in a session, then I simply have the privilege of following him or her there. It can be very exciting and satisfying to have these loftier conversations, but it's no less fulfilling to be an agent of change at whatever level of sense making that arrives at the door of coaching.
Yeah, no, I understand, because this is essentially just adding sort of a pathway as well, where you can also join the client, right? Get to where they want to go, aligning to their values, to their beliefs, and so on. So last question for you. Can you provide an example of a transformational experience where coaching and spirituality worked synergistically, resulting maybe in a significant or personal or professional goal growth, sorry, for the client? And like what and the key is here to talk about what particularly made it this powerful for you.
Yeah, I don't know if it made it, if the question of it being powerful for me is as important as what makes it powerful for them, right? But what's fresh in mind is really, like I said, I just had a session just a few minutes before coming into this one. And this was an ending session. And so she was feeding back to me how the coaching sessions work for her. And when she started the sessions, she described herself as kind of spineless, always kind of frustration. There was a lot of emotional dysregulation there. There was a lot of sadness, a lot of worthlessness. And so she came into coaching wanting to have more courage and confidence, right? And I think some of the other symptoms, if I remember correctly, she had, crippling anxiety, as she called it. She was feeling sick all the time. She couldn't sleep. She had tingles in her fingers. And today, at the end of the session, she said to me, what the coaching done for me is that I kind of understand myself now, and I kind of know, who I am and who I want to be, and I have the kind of courage and confidence to stand in that. And the things that she talked about that have improved is that she now has a much better relationship with her colleagues. She used words like, I feel like I have freed myself, which are, again, going back to principles of awakening and freedom of the self. She said, I have real value in looking at the other side, the other point of view, but knowing that my own point of view is also, alive and well and valid. And she said, it's taken a weight off. She said, it's in coaching for her organizational presence. What she's also been able to do is to take that back into her relationships with her children, with her relationships with her spouse. And she said it's helped her in all aspects of her life. How we did that with this particular client is that, we sort of worked with the intersectionalities of who she was, her culture, her background, what those cultural mindsets were saying to her. And then she kind of, leveraged her own understanding of her faith, her cultural faith. And I'd rather, for confidentiality purposes, I'd rather not say what her faith system was. And we used those principles to help her get back on track. So it was just very easy to then kind of be able to frame, like, this behavior, does that align with that spiritual principle that you really believe in? And if it's a no, then how do we align back? So we're almost using that as a compass for us without having to go into too much complexity.
Thank you so much for that answer, for that question. You really made justice to the profile. Thank you so much for all the value that you shared. I will summarize briefly what we just discussed today. So in summary, right, of this conversation, it's highly important to define what spirituality is and how it connects to coaching, and also what coaching is, right? Because sometimes people confuse them and think that one thing applies to the other when it's two separate things. It helps you understand in depth where boundaries lie as well, and it allows for an opportunity for growth and more sense of self. The positive psychology has plenty of tools and reinforcement that actually can enable this through your practice. And overall, what we need to see it is as an embodiment, right? Like as an embodiment and a tool that will just further allow you, or an additional characteristic of the individual that will further benefit your coaching practice. And very important, the last thing that you said there, that it's more important the transformation that the coachee can get themselves rather than the impact they'd have for yourself, right? Because that means that you are truly connected to that embodiment of the self-awareness and the self-awareness that needs to be embodied by your coachee. Would you like to add anything more?
I was just taking a moment to digest everything you said. No, thank you for that. That was a very good summary. What would I like to add to that? I suppose maybe just the fact of coming, as a coach, coming into your own understanding of what your greater mission, purpose, calling, and how that aligns in your own work as a coach. That would be, I think, very helpful for the coaching process. And then to begin to just look at how many tools there are out there, and how much headway or how much space and progress that it's made in the world of psychology, not just the world of coaching, right? Because there's a lot of tools and tips out there and interventions that coaches can use to help themselves if you have a client who comes in, like, and again, very short example, very recently also I had a client who just wanted to work in her with her leadership career progress from the perspective of Buddhist non-attachment, which meant she did not want to be attached to any kind of next level, growth or whatever, and how to anchor herself in that. So there is so much there that you can work with, and it's so much fun to work with that when you begin to open yourself up to all the spiritual faiths that are all there, all the spiritual perspectives that are out there, and they can be very helpful tools to lend quite a powerful hand to the coaching process.
Thank you so much, Alison, once again, for accepting our invitation to be part of the Unlock podcast. Thank you so much for enabling this really powerful conversation on spirituality and coaching. And if you want more information or are looking to learn more about coaching and how it intertwines with spirituality, you can always find more information in unlock.org. That is unloq.org. And to our listeners, stay tuned as we continue to unlock human potential.